exciting prospect for the Caribbean and for the region. So welcome to this second session on the final day of this very important conference. I want to acknowledge Mr. Dimitar Gantev of WIPO. Without you, sir, I'm sure this event would not have been possible. So we want to thank you, and I certainly want to thank Carol Simpson and her team at JAMPRO for putting together this amazing event. At the opening of the conference, I was particularly moved by Professor Hawkins' presentation. I've already requested a copy of it because it's going to be required learning and regurgitation for me. But I certainly will remember your contextualizing of creativity, creative ecology, and the creative economy. And for all intents and purposes, this discussion today at this time, is somewhat of a convergence of all of these three principles, I think, which undergird the discussions which we've been having, and some very spirited ones. I must highlight that particular one on policy for the creative industries, which was quite feisty in instances, but it's a Jamaican way, it's a Caribbean way in how we do things. So this discussion is intended to explore the potential of animation and gaming as one sector of the creative industries with vast potential for the Caribbean region. I was doing a little research, and when we talk about creative economy, it costs somewhere in the region of US $350,000 to produce a half-an-hour animated production, particularly for television, in the United States. In India, that same half-an-hour segment could cost you somewhere in the region of US $75,000. You clearly get the picture there in terms of cost, in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. I think when we think of the Caribbean, we should think, for the purposes of this discussion, of the region as a nearshore region to North America, which are indeed the major producers of animated content, and by far the major consumers of animated content. We have 4 presenters here who will come with different perspectives to this conversation on gaming and animation this morning. I'd ask them all to consider in their presentations what's the potential of the region to earn wealth and reputation from animation and gaming, and how might we build regional collaboration to maximize on this opportunity. I know Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have already made significant strides in seeking to position themselves to earn from this industry. And so we need to take a more pan-Caribbean approach to see how we can really capitalize on the potential of animation and gaming for our sector. Let me quickly introduce our panel. To my near right is David Greenspan, whom you have heard from earlier in the conference. He's the Senior Director of Legal and Business Affairs at NAMCO BANDAI Games America Incorporated in San Francisco. And he will tell us all about gaming, what it is, what are the legal ramifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Greenspan has taught, are you related to Alan Greenspan, perchance? Well, okay, he's a distant cousin. But Mr. Greenspan has taught classes covering entertainment law, licensing, and video games with a primary focus on transactional issues at Santa Clara University School of Law, at Pepperdine Law School and Hastings Law School. He's terrible, however, at playing games. Not even Angry Birds. Angry Birds?
Pretty good at pong.
Well, he was able to negotiate a favorable royalty rate one time by defeating a licensor's lawyer in a sports video game. So there's still some hope yet for Mr. Greenspan. Our next speaker is Mr. Robert Scott, and Robert is the Vice President of Export and Market Development at JAMPRO, and JAMPRO is the government's trade and investment promotions agency, which will have a pivotal role in this whole matter of gaming and animation and promoting it and promoting the opportunities both locally and internationally. Robert comes to JAMPRO. He recently joined JAMPRO as an international business development specialist. He has served as country manager, customer business development manager for the North Caribbean, for Mars Caribbean and Central America, the third largest food company in the world, developing and executing routes to markets through the Caribbean. Robert is a Justice of the Peace. He's also a diplomat. He's an honorary consul for the Republic of Latvia in Jamaica, and he's a Vice Dean of the Consular Corps here in Jamaica. Based on his build, he's a big guy like myself. He's into rowing in a big way, and he spends most of his weekends at sea. I find it interesting that Robert says here that he's married to one wife and has 3 sons. And then Kevin Jackson, the Public Relations Director at Jamaica Animation Network. He's over to the far right. He's a writer, an animator, and a filmmaker, and he's Public Relations Director for Jamaica Animation Network. So he's one of the driving forces behind Jamaica's animation industry. He has won awards for 3 short films, including one for Best Animation at the NCU Lignum Vitae Film Festival in 2013. And then next to Kevin is Wayne Sinclair. Wayne is an entrepreneur, a businessman with an eye for the money. He's executive director of GSW Animation, one of the leading animation concerns here in Jamaica. He has worked in various capacities in film and live music productions, as well as in creative industries policy development. Why weren't you here yesterday? But he has worked with companies such as ABC Television, Warner Brothers, the William Morris Agency, and the Reggae Sunsplash stores of the United States and Japan. So quite an accomplished gentleman who describes himself as a serial entrepreneur. So he knows how to fail and how to succeed. So we have a wonderful panel. Can I ask you to just give a round of applause? And so I'm going to invite now David to come. He will give us global context, explain a little bit about gaming, and get our conversation going. David?
Thank you. I always seem to be the first one to speak in front of crowds, school exams, but I'm never the first one online to get free sports tickets or concert tickets. So before I actually talk, I just want to mention one thing. I worked on a book with the help of WIPO, some really fantastic people, and it's close to publication, and it's going to come out soon. It's called Mastering the Game, Business and Legal Issues for Video Game Developers, and hopefully you can get it online when it comes out. It will provide a lot of good information for people regarding the legal and business issues and dealing with all the different players associated with the video game industry. And just wanted to plug that, if that's all right.
Okay.
And, yeah. That's right. Okay. So animation in video games is a pretty broad topic. So I thought I'd touch upon a few different areas this morning. And those areas which I'll talk about, I'm going to refer to them as levels. And level 1 is some numbers in the gaming industry, highlighting the significance of video games in the entertainment industry. Some of these numbers you may have heard yesterday, so I apologize, but there are also some new people who did not attend yesterday, and Mark suggested he thought it would be a good idea to throw out some numbers. I've added some numbers for you, so hopefully that will keep your interest. Level 2 is a brief description covering the evolution of games and how they looked throughout the years. I have a clip that will go through and also discuss some of the IP issues in which a game developer or an animator must be concerned about when making a game. And then thirdly, I'll talk about some additional comments about development and also try to connect animators into the video game industry. Clearly, it's difficult for Jamaica because they don't necessarily have a game community, but I'll throw out some suggestions and hopefully that will help at least get the ball rolling. So level 1, supposedly the easiest level to play. As mentioned yesterday, many people believe the video game industry is in fact has surpassed the film industry in income. The numbers vary, but at the very least, the video game industry last year achieved $63 billion, far surpassing the music industry, and is today the fastest growing sector in the entertainment industry. There was an article that I saw this morning that said that people are predicting that the video game industry in 2014 will hit $77 billion. A few numbers and facts now about some of the platforms in which games are distributed on. The consoles. In November of 2013, both Microsoft released, well, both Sony and Microsoft released their new generation of games, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And I had mentioned yesterday that within the first 24 hours when those games went on sale, each one sold over 1 million units. To date, Sony has sold over 4 million units, and Microsoft has sold over 3 million units. Looking back at the previous generations of games, Nintendo Wii, which was the best-selling console in the previous generation of hardware, sold 98 million units worldwide. Microsoft Xbox and PlayStation 3 have each sold over 72 million units. And that same article that I read this morning also predicted that Sony and Microsoft would each perhaps achieve 100 million units sold during this generation. Unfortunately, Nintendo's Wii U, which is a new platform they released about 14 months ago, has not done very well, and there are a number of reasons for that, primarily that there's not a lot of good software out there for that product, and therefore it doesn't drive the hardware. Mobile and tablets, another platform, although estimates for the size of the mobile gaming industry vary greatly. Mobile gaming, which includes feature phones, smartphones, tablets, generated around US $8 to $12 billion in revenue in 2012. And what makes these numbers extraordinary is that a lot of these games, well, probably all of these games, are sold at a fraction of the cost in which games are sold at retail for the console manufacturers. There are currently more than 160,000 active game apps on the App Store alone. It is estimated that the iOS App Store, which is Apple, has that apps have been downloaded more than 60 billion times. A study conducted by the research firm, I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, but I'll say it's Magid Associates, reported that 69% of tablet owners regularly play games, and a tablet owner downloaded an average of 25 games in 2012. Doesn't mean they paid for all the games, but they downloaded them. Games in Google Play and iOS App Store accounted for over 80% and 75% of revenue, respectively. These numbers prove why the biggest change in the gaming industry is perhaps the mobile side of things. With the advent of smartphones, games, by the way, have become the single largest use of mobile smartphones. Gaming on mobile devices went from simplified games that resembled games in the late 1980s to games closer now to PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3. And that's why they've become a real alternative for a lot of game players, because the quality is so excellent now on smartphones that some consumers feel they don't necessarily need to play on consoles. A major feature of the mobile game industry is that they're lower cost to develop games, and for this reason, it has allowed development to occur throughout the world, not just the United States and Japan. Mobile development studios can be found across the globe, from South Korea and Eastern Europe, which have become hotbeds for mobile development. And because it's easier to develop for mobile, there's always the good and the bad. The market's saturated with a lot of games, and it's sometimes difficult to distinguish one game from another. To illustrate, the top 10 grossing app, why I didn't say the #1 grossing app, I don't know, but this is the stat I have. To illustrate, the top 10 grossing app has 10 times the revenue of the #100th app. So it's the top games that are selling well and probably represent the majority of the revenue earned. Another major change in the industry is the growing importance of digitally distributed games, which can be done via PC or console. And we talked a little about this yesterday. Online revenue, including digital distribution, increased in revenue to U.S. $24 billion in 2012. And this number will continue to grow as it becomes more accepted to the consumer. And why are these numbers growing? Well, for developers distributing games digitally on PC, developers can distribute games worldwide without the need to fight over limited shelf space in retail stores. They also don't have to incur the cost that it takes to actually put a product into a store. The leader in 2012 for PC distribution was Valve's Stream system, which in December of 2013 had over 50 million users and around 5 million users logged in at one time. Those are extraordinary numbers. These numbers are already a little outdated. I think they're closer to 60 million, and they are the dominant player when it comes to distributing games on the PC. In addition, and this is also why it's very attractive, it has over 1,800 titles available in its catalog. If you go to a retail store, maybe they have 20 games. For developers distributing games digitally on console, developers don't have to order a minimum amount of quantities, which is required by the console manufacturer. So, for example, if I want to go into retail, I am required by contract to order a certain amount of product. And for each product I order, I have to pay a licensing fee. And that's how most of the consoles make their money. They make it by the sales of games as compared to the sales of their platforms. By going digitally using the console, I avoid those licensing fees. So that's a big advantage for a developer, and that's why they become very attractive. Level 2, IP and game development. Intellectual property is the most important branch of law for video game developers and publishers to understand. And video games are made exclusively from IP. And just from a show of hands, do people remember what I said about publishers, or do you want me to repeat that? Okay, no hands, so I'll repeat that then. So publishers basically are involved in the financing of games, the distribution of games, the marketing of games, and sometimes the actual development of games. So think of it as a film studio that is making a movie, distributing the movie, marketing the movie, financing the movie. Same type of concept. Don't think of it as a traditional book publisher, because video games and books are probably on the opposite scale. Now, mom and dad, read a book. No, I'd rather play a video game. So they're always fighting. So keep that in mind, what a publisher does, because that will be important for the remaining part of the conversation. IP is a vital element of video game development. Contracts, employment agreements, distribution agreements, advertising, and licensing. Other than money, it's probably the most significant point negotiated between the parties. Who, at the end of the day, is going to own the intellectual property? And as we venture into the next generation of game consoles with an increasing number of major platforms, including social, tablet, and mobile, more money than ever will be put into game development. And this has been the trend since the start of the game industry. As we move forward, more money is spent on development because of the capabilities and the technological advances in game development require more money to be spent. Game development budgets for many of the large titles, but not all, already meet or exceed film budgets in terms of years in production and total cost. Something that I failed to mention yesterday, that game development, depending on the type of game you're making, if it's a traditional console game, development at the minimum will probably be 1 year, but can be as long as 3 years. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of people working. Mobile games, on the other hand, may only take 6 months, 12 weeks. It really depends on the quality of the game, and that's why also costs are a lot cheaper for mobile games. While console games can cost anywhere from $30 million to $100 million, mobile games are probably tapping off right now at $1 million at most. But most people probably spend about $100,000, $200,000. But again, we'll see the increase in the cost for mobile development, because as your smartphone gets better, it's going to be able to do more stuff. And so game developers are going to want to give the consumer more content and better gameplay experience. So as a result of increased budget, protecting the investment of the developers is critical, and that's why it's very important to protect the IP against pirates and others that may not want to pay for it. Of equal importance is making sure you can exploit your IP in a game for maximum profit in order to recoup your cost and hopefully generate profits. So what are the major issues for IP? Copyright, trademarks, patents, rights of publicity, and even trade secrets all fall within the video game development structure. Copyright is arguably the most important IP. It protects most games. Generally speaking, copyright protects the fixed expression of ideas and easily qualifies as the best tool for protecting game property because of its ease of use, power, and versatility. As far as video games are concerned, copyright covers software, the story, the characters, the music, the graphics, and in certain instances, the environments in which the players play in, and of course, the entire game. Trademarks are arguably the second most important IP protection for game companies after copyright, since a good trademark can set a company and its game apart from others in the minds of consumers. The most common trademarks, and I'm sure everyone knows that by now, are words, names, symbols, graphics, even short phrases used in business today to identify a specific company's products. And trademarks come into being when they are used in business by a company to identify products or services. And while IP is critical for developers in creating and distributing a game, they need to obviously protect it so they can earn revenue. There's also situations where the developer needs to know what he's allowed to do when he makes a game. The IP he incorporates into that game. Does he need to license it? Does he have rights, perhaps, that allow him to use it without having to license it? Those are issues that the lawyer and developers must deal with on a daily basis. And throughout the evolution of the gaming industry, developers have incorporated licenses in their games to help distinguish their games from other product, with the hope, obviously, that with that license, it attracts consumers. They see recognizable brands, more realistic gameplay, therefore they want to purchase that product. And to achieve this, developers have obtained content owned by other parties, such as movie studios. There's a Spider-Man game, there's a Batman game, sports leagues, there's FIFA soccer, there's baseball perhaps, authors, Lord of the Rings, comic books, Spawn, I can think of, Marvel is a comic book, and toy manufacturers through licensing agreements. And that would include, for example, Ninja Turtles. Usually, a developer may want to incorporate licensed property into the game under a number of different scenarios, including one, basing the entire game on an underlying property. Again, Spider-Man, Batman, that game is about the movie. Two, incorporating into their game intellectual property which allows the player to use those elements and creates more realism. Perfect example is a sports game. I want to be that particular player. I want to be that particular runner. And that gives the consumer power to be that person and control them. Licensing in games has focused on the traditional platforms of console and PC, but today we're going to see a change with the advent of mobile. You're going to see more licensing in mobile, perhaps actually less licensing in PC because of cost. Some examples recently of licensing in the mobile field. Angry Birds was relatively quickly followed by Angry Birds Star Wars. The game Temple Run now features the likeness of a hometown favorite. I'll give you a hint. He runs really fast. Okay? So, I put together a sports video, and it's American sports. I foolishly didn't put in your type of football, but I have my type of football. And don't start yet. And the purpose of this video is to first of all show you the evolution of games from Pong to what games look like today. And the reason why I want to show it is because you're going to see why intellectual property has become such a significant issue. And so we're going to we're not going to run, but we're going to go through this tape. And you can see over the years that the technology got better, so did the graphics. And with better graphics comes the desire for developers to create more realistic environments, whether that is for a sports game, adventure game, action game. And in this clip, you'll see how games have evolved and started to incorporate more IP. At first, it was some team names, player names, then brands, sounds, architecture, the likeness of players, and even tattoos, and potentially all involving legal issues on whether the developer would need to license these rights for use in the game. And while I'll focus on U.S. law, it is important to know why I am focusing on U.S. law. One, because I live in the United States, and secondly, the United States is a major market. And for anyone to create a game, in most situations, in order to make as much money as possible, they need to enter into the U.S. as a market and sell their game. But you have to be concerned. You can make a game for one territory that may fulfill all the laws and you won't have any problems, but when you deliver and distribute that game in another territory, the laws may be different. In the United States, they obviously deal with a lot of laws, and so you need to be safe if you're going to distribute your product in the United States. And that's basically part of my job. Every week I'm reviewing games. I'm also thinking about or making a decision on whether we need to license something, don't need to license something. Perhaps it falls under certain exceptions. So that's my day-to-day job. And that job can be difficult because it's not so clear-cut what you think you may need a license for. And things are changing in the video games. Traditionally, video game companies have been very conservative. They would license a lot of properties. Whether they needed to do it or not, they still licensed it because that was the safe way. Companies now are becoming a little more aggressive, feeling that they don't necessarily need to license certain things because of U.S. law that has changed, and also the recognition that video games fall under the First Amendment, and a lot of people think that that provides additional protection for video games. Just like books, just like newspapers, just like films, video games should get the same type of protection. So let's now take a look at the clip, starting off with Pong. And I like to say this is the first tennis game ever created. Jimmy Connor's on the right. Here's a game, and it's actually already old. It's probably about 5 years old, but you obviously can see some of the realism there. And I have college football because I'm going to talk about an interesting case that's going through the U.S. courts right now. But this was the first college football game. Pretty simplistic graphics, although it looked fantastic in 1996. We thought this was the greatest thing in the world. And this is created by Electronic Arts, which was the major video game publisher. They still are. NCAA football was created by Sony. I'm somewhere in that game. NCAA Football 2004. Again, graphics are getting a lot better over the years. NCAA Football 2012. We may have to go back to that one because that's one of the court cases. This is American football. This was a very popular game in 1991, but you can see all they really have is just the name of the football team. Well, we're going pretty fast right here. We're already up to 2007. But now you have logos, you have stadiums, you have the names of the players. You know, that's the exact replication of a stadium in Kansas City in the United States. Well, the issue is, do I need the rights for that? You see the players' names, all the things associated with the player are pretty clear now. A far cry from 1992 or 93. You can keep on going. This is one of the most recent games. Again, to me, that looks extraordinary. All right, baseball. This is going to be. This will not be video. Most of this will be quick screenshots. Those are the games I grew up on. And Earl Weaver Baseball, first PC game I ever bought. I bought it just to play a baseball game. And you can see the incredible artwork in these games. You can hold it on that because this is a game from last year. And again, just look at the crowd. Incredible detail. There's probably a few guys that spend a year just doing the crowd. What better job? Stadium, very detailed. It has brands now, actual advertisers that appear in the stadium. The players, very much like they actually stand and bat and move around. Also, there'll be a voiceover. There'll be announcers associated with this game. Music is in this game. So a lot of IP elements are all combined to make this game. An incredible project, in my opinion. See if we have any more clips. Okay, basketball. I think you'll be impressed by this also. This was one of the first sports games. It was Larry Bird versus Julius Erving, two very famous players in basketball in 1983. Now you got the logo. You even have a voiceover. Very simplistic announcing. March Madness was a college game. Oh, we already skipped. Now this looks real to me. In fact, I think I may have made a mistake. But this is what it looks like. Absolutely incredible. So you see Staples Arena, which is the name or the brand associated with the basketball arena. This is another game. Let's see, there's some tattoos there. Spalding, the name of the manufacturer. You can hold it for a second. Spalding, the name of the ball manufacturer. Well, someone had to get the rights to have that name appear on the ball. So tattoos. It seems like every player in the NBA has a tattoo, but years ago when I was negotiating a deal with the NBA to get a license, tattoos came up. And the developer said, we'd like to have tattoos in our game. And the league said, I'm not so crazy about it because we've seen some of those tattoos. It could be a bad image. Plus, does anyone know who Shaq is? Okay, good. Because I didn't know who he was until I made this video game. And so Shaq has, a Superman logo, or at least he did. Oh, do we have to call Warner Brothers and get the rights for Superman logo tattoo on someone's arm? That's the discussion I had. Did I ever think that would be the discussion I would have after I graduated law school? No, it wasn't. But that's what we talked about. Well, you got to kind of cover it up. And so that's probably what we did. But somehow, the good news is that, I guess, with the NBA license that provides you with all the teams and the names of the players, you get tattoos. So when you want to do a game, you'll know that. Okay, so keep on going. Let's see what shows up next. This most recent game, again, absolutely incredible realism. So can artists here in Jamaica create that type of art? Yeah. All right, great. Not that one, the one before that. Okay, hockey. Now you're going to see how much it advances. You're seeing logos on the ice. Hold it on that one because that's pretty incredible. Now that's a still shot, but that's a little misleading, but pretty much the game will look like that. And that's absolutely incredible. And every little detail you can pick out on that. And let's see if there's anything more on that. If there's any more on the tape. Okay, I think that means end. So, the reason why I wanted to show that, because what's one of the hot issues in the United States? Rights of publicity. And not only are there trademark and copyright issues, but there could potentially be rights of publicity issues. And hopefully, you notice that the depictions of the athletes throughout the years got better and more detailed. They got so good that it eventually led to a number of lawsuits from athletes. Now, not a sports game, but even rock singers started suing under rights of publicity, claiming that their likeness was used in games without their permission. And generally speaking, publicity rights are a set of rights that allow a person to control the commercial distribution of certain identifying marks, which may include, and this is somewhat of a list from courts in the United States and also from statutes. The name, the image, the likeness, the voice, lookalikes, and even signatures or other identifiable representations of personality which protects that person from unwanted commercial exposure. And this right allows a celebrity to be paid to endorse a certain product and simultaneously allows that celebrity to prevent a business from misappropriating an endorsement by that celebrity. And the United States probably has the broadest protection when it comes to rights of publicity, although surprisingly, this protection is provided by the states. What happens with that is that the United States is 50 states, I think, I'll include Texas, and each one could perhaps have different laws. Some protected by court decisions, some protected by statutes, others combine those three. Some states even have post-mortem rights of publicity, and most others are limited to a certain number of years. One state, and I'll let you guess which state, also the home of a popular singer, has post-mortem rights in perpetuity. Good old Tennessee. Elvis. Okay, so Tennessee recognizes the importance of that, and as a result, the state is going to collect unlimited amounts of money. So publicity rights are important in the game context in a few instances. First, using a person in a game or to advertise a game usually requires that that person provides permission. The same is true for using a person's voice or other recognizable characteristics. Failing to obtain the person's permission could result in a court granting what's called an injunction, which is an extreme remedy which forces the developer or the publisher to remove the product from retail. And to illustrate the issues that come up with rights of publicity, there's cases now going through the U.S. courts dealing with college athletes. And in the United States, college athletes are not allowed to have rights of publicity because if they sell those rights, they do have them, but they can't sell them or do anything with them because then they lose their eligibility to play in the college level. So they're caught. Really? 3 minutes? Okay. So 3 basketball minutes or 3 real minutes? So what's happened is that the manufacturers of the game, EA, produced a college football game. They're not allowed to use the player's name because that would result in ineligibility for the player. So they don't license those rights. But what EA did was they used the player's skin color, hair, facial features, jersey numbers, statistics, athletic skills, and biographical information including player's home state, class year, weight, height. So taken all together, even though they didn't use the name, they used all these elements. So what did the college football players say? That's me. I should be compensated. And it's gone back and forth. EA has argued under First Amendment rights that, yeah, we used that stuff, but under U.S. law, we transformed the initial players' rights into something new. We created something new, and therefore we should be protected. And actually, some of the lower courts bought that argument. But when it went to appeal, it appears that EA has lost. Now, it's possible that the Supreme Court in the United States will actually hear a rights of publicity case based on a video game. That sounds pretty cool to me, but that's probably going to happen, and we'll have to wait and see. But that shows you how technology has advanced so much that we're now talking about rights of publicity issues in video games. And therefore, developers need to be careful. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. There are things in the United States such as First Amendment, fair use, parity, incidental use, materials that may be in the public domain, and something called sine faire, which is just another French phrase I can't pronounce correctly, but is also a doctrine that recognizes that some expressions of ideas are so often used that they cannot be copyrighted by themselves. Now, what a lawyer needs to do and what a game developer needs to do, well, can I use it in a game? Do I need to pay for a license? Tough call to make. But you have to be careful because even though at the end of the day you may be right on all the merits, you're going to lose because it's going to cost you maybe money. Even if you win the case, it's going to cost you time. You're going to be worried whether I can use it or not. So it's a tough balance. And let's say you're wrong. what happens? You're going to be forced to pay damages, including profits made from any actual use of the unlicensed IP. You may have to stop selling the disputed game, redesign the game to avoid any possible problems, enter into a licensing agreement, and the terms may be very unfavorable for you, and maybe none of those even are options. And finally, to make matters worse, the console manufacturers require in their contracts that all the IP that is included in your game is cleared. The fact that it may be an issue now may result in the console manufacturer deciding not to support your game. So those are important issues. So having said all that, how does that tie in to the fact that what do I do as a game developer? How can I get involved in this particular industry? So I've created some of the legal landmines. Hopefully you're still interested, but also things to consider. Games, they're important IP. Two things stand out: the actual visual element that a developer or animator creates, and also the underlying code that works the game. Those are two significant IP issues that you are definitely going to possibly, or definitely should, maintain control on. As part of the creative project, a number of different people need to work on a game, including engineers who develop the code, animators who create the artwork, a producer who oversees the project to make sure the game is being delivered on time and finished on time, sound people, musicians, testers who play the game every day, every minute to make sure that, in fact, the game works and doesn't crash, possible talent to provide voiceover or motion capture, and even lawyers get involved in making the games because they got to look at these clips to make sure that, in fact, they're okay. So how do companies hire animators? Well, in most situations, one, the animator actually could be his own company and creates his own work, so not an issue with that. He owns the IP. But most typically what happens is a company hires an animator, and he hires him generally under two situations. One, he's an employee, and through contract, the employer owns all the work created by the animator. Secondly, a publisher may hire a company. They do work in animation. I want to hire you to do work for my project. Our company does that all the time. We farm out work to Hungary, Romania, the Ukraine. Incredibly talented people who create software for us, do animation, and we work with them. And also that covers all the different platforms. And that's possibly where the Caribbean comes into play if they can do this type of work. And so what happens in this situation, the publisher hires a vendor, your company as an animator, and through a contract, the employer or the publisher owns all the intellectual property, but in return you make money. And so that's a very simplistic way of how things work. But the issue then becomes, well, how do I get in front of people who are involved in this industry? And that's clearly the biggest obstacle for the Caribbean, because I'm not aware of much of a development or gaming community. So how do you start? And I guess you're going to start somewhere, so I'm going to just I'm going to go into overtime, and I apologize for that. But I'm just going to throw it at you real quickly. But these are things to consider. So if I'm working for a company, and hopefully by the time I get back to the United States I still am, these are the things that they're probably going to look at. What have you done? How good is the talent? And can it compete against other companies? Do the artists understand how to use the various software necessary to make a game? So Jamaica appears to have a pretty nice community when it comes to creating animation for film, television. Can you take that talent and move it to the video game side? It's been done successfully because when Hollywood was slowing down in the 1990s and early 2000s, the video game companies grabbed a lot of those talented animators, and those are people that are working on video games today. What are your costs? It's a competitive world out there. Are your costs competing against other companies throughout the world? That's going to be something very important to consider. So cost, talent. How do you open the door, though, to get access to these companies? It's tough. So here's what I'm going to throw at you. I don't have necessarily all the answers for that. In fact, I probably don't have many answers or any at all. So it's difficult, but you got to start somewhere. And I think some of the possibilities starting, clearly you can go through me and I can open maybe some doors, but I don't know how other companies work, so they may not answer your call. But you have to put together probably a tape of some sort, or tape. I'm aging myself. No one uses tape anymore. You download something probably. So you download something to this company, but you got to get in front of the right people who make decisions in hiring people that they will use your animation. And so I'm more than happy to help anyone who wants to try to get in the door. I don't know how successful I'll be, but I'm offering that for people, and then start the ball rolling. So that's my presentation to you for today.
Well, thank you, David. That was a slam dunk presentation. And you even inspired me. I feel like going back to school to study law, specializing in IP and gaming, of course, because I suspect there's lots of money down the pike. All right. Let me now invite Robert Scott, who is representing Dan Edwards, the president of JAMPRO, who really wanted to been here. Dan had to jump on a plane to go and do ICT promotions in Mumbai. So Robert is here. Robert has a big job at JAMPRO. He's responsible for export and overseas market development. And in his division is now housed the Jamaica Film Commission and the Creative Industries Department. So, Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. So, Mr. Dimitar Ganchev. Mr. Dimitar Ganchev, Deputy Director, Head of Creative Industries, WIPO. Ms. Carol Newman, Executive Director of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office. Distinguished panelists, regional representatives, members of the creative community in Jamaica, ladies and gentlemen, that is animation. Animation done in Jamaica. Let's give it a round of applause. Yes. So we got a fantastic deep dive into gaming, and I therefore won't say very much about gaming, but I really want to spend a little time on animation, and I'm a marketer, so I'm going to show you the money. This is exactly where we ought to go and how we can get there. And I'll also share with you a little about how JAMPRO can help you to get there and pretty much create a context within which we all can go forward and do something phenomenal in this area. Now, the animation global overview, you would have gotten a taste of this from the earlier presentation, but take note that global spending on media and entertainment is predicted to rise from 1.6 trillion to 2.2 trillion in 2012. Yes? That's a 5.6% compound growth rate. However, the global animation and gaming market is segmented in pretty much 4 geographies: North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Japan, and the rest of the world. Where do you think we fall? The rest of the world, for now. For now. Now, the global animation and gaming market is expected to grow from $1.22 billion in 2010 to $242 billion by 2016, a compound annual growth rate of 12.94%. So whereas overall entertainment is growing, the whole area of animation and gaming is growing even faster. So that certainly is telling us that perhaps that's where we start, we ought to look. Now, let me tell you, JAMPRO is really, really proud, and we hold this industry very dear, because this is a new industry for Jamaica, and I think a lot of the things were done right, and we were right there at the birth. So JAMPRO feels as if it's the godparent of this entire industry. And we really, really are going to be doing a lot to help this grow, and I will share with you as we go along. Now, when we look at the various segments, there's the entertainment segment, which includes the animated adult entertainment, the production started at the youth and the family, animated feature films, which you know is doing extremely well globally. But there's also the edutainment of custom content, merchandising and other intellectual property. And of course, content for website, and believe it or not, the mobile phones. Now, one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in too is the whole area of education. I am a kinesthetic learner. I know I'm kinesthetic and auditor, which means that I learn best by hearing and by doing. And my sons are the same way. Now, what I find out is that our educational system tends to teach a lot visually. So there are a lot of our kids who, unfortunately, don't get the message. And I think by us looking at what we can do in this particular area of animation means that we can actually helping them in educational space by providing educational tools for our youth. Now, one of the things I want to share with you, okay, here I am. What's the opportunity here for us to earn? Now, this is a list. This is not my list. This is from Forbes. If we look at the top earning cartoon characters, they have a net worth of $209 billion. Mickey Mouse and Friends. Mickey Mouse was created. Do you know when Mickey Mouse was created? Long ago, in the 1930s. Yes? Now that has stayed, and that's one of the wonderful things about intellectual property. It is sustainable. It can go through from generation to generation, and if properly designed and put in place, you will continue to earn through generations. Mickey Mouse and Friends earns over $5.8 billion. Winnie the Pooh, $5.6 billion. Lord of the Rings, $2.9 billion. Harry Potter, $2.8 billion. Finding Nemo, which is a fairly recent, given the whole scheme of things here, $2 billion. So that's a lot. Now, when we look at the global gaming, I'm not going to tread too much here because we got a really an excellent and comprehensive presentation. But we're seeing here $70.4 billion growing 6% year on year. And when we look on the top selling video games, Call of Duty Black Ops, our teenagers love that one, that's over 1.5 billion. World of Witchcraft, created in 2004, over $10 billion. Grand Theft Auto, $1.35 billion, and that was created in 2008. So what we're seeing here is certainly an excellent opportunity to get into something that is growing. Now, when we look at the major trends, we see in animation there is increasing development of intellectual property from traditional outsourcing countries. There's a growth of the big three companies, the Cartoon Network, the Nickelodeon, and Disney. There's also the rise, and this is very, very interesting to us, rise of co-productions with Asia. And there's increasing cost, Mark mentioned them earlier, and there's also an increase in the animated adult entertainment and feature films. Now, when we look at other trends, we see the outsourcing of animation, and we'll hear a lot more from that when GSW speaks. But this is a significant increase in outsourcing, and simply why? The persons who are doing it before, they have now moved up the tree. They are creating their own content, and they're creating content for their own markets. So guess what? They don't have any time to do anybody else's work. Who does that create an opportunity for? For the rest of the world. Yes? That undefined rest of the world. So these persons are now moving up the tree, doing their own things. So let's take it a little closer to home, Caribbean animation. We already have a regional industry. Yes? We already have that. We can see here, Trinidad and Tobago, their animation industry is dominated by one major studio and several smaller ones. Their production, however, they focus on advertisements. When we look at University of Trinidad and Tobago, They offer an undergraduate degree. That's where they are, an undergraduate degree in digital media studies, animation, and a certificate in animation that's delivered over 12 months. So they are certainly moving ahead. Currently, over 350 animators in Trinidad and Tobago produce at least 50 graduates in 2D animation annually. So they have 50 persons coming out looking for jobs in this particular area. No, not necessarily developers of their own IP, but as workers. So what we have now is a lot of foot soldiers gaining the skill in that country, looking now to move up the chain. Then Barbados had a 2012 launch of the Caribbean Digital Media Center, which is their full-fledged animation studio. Currently, 24 Barbadians have been trained in 3D animation techniques. So they're still there, smaller country, smaller number of animators, but they're all part of the Caribbean pie that we are creating. Then, of course, Guyana, their first animation studio, launched in May 2013. Now, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica now all have Toon Boom equipped animation studios. Toon Boom is a leading animation software in this side of the world, and others planned in St. Vincent, and St. Lucia. This expansion, listen to this, is expected to create 3,000 to 5,000 new jobs in the Caribbean over the next years. Does that seem a lot? 5,000 in one industry? Seems a lot. Well, one of my future slides will tell you what's the opportunity overall, and then you'll see exactly where we are in the whole scheme of things. Now, what is the vision for Jamaica's animation industry? The short-term drive job creation to take advantage of the outsourcing opportunities in animation by increasing the numbers of trained animators. Unfortunately, we are a victim of our own success. This industry has been created in few short years. We are getting the jobs, but we don't have enough animators to do the jobs. So it's kind of a little bit of the problem that we're having in other productive areas of Jamaica. However, we understand that we can train animators anywhere between 3 to 6 months to get them up to speed. So the focus for Jamaica right now, and this is what I like to do, I said this is where we are now. The whole opportunity is really to widen the base, get more persons interested in animation to understand the opportunity. And this is the sort of presentation that I'm doing now, is what we call messaging, where we put the message out there, let people understand it. Let me look at this. What does it take? What are the skills here? And the wonderful thing about this, I was at a graduation on Saturday of Caramac. They had graduates for their six-month program. And I can tell you, nearly all of those graduates, well, all of those graduates are eligible for a job with GSW. They are prepared to be interviewed, and if they meet various specifications, quality, and so on, they can get employed. Now the question is, which other industry do we have that you move from the classroom into the workroom? It's a fantastic opportunity for us. It is a fantastic opportunity for us. Now, so that's the start. We're building the base. And we want you all to send a message, get persons to looking at this area. This is not something that you need to study for 15 years to get a degree. This is something that if you have the skills, the artistic skills, the computer literacy, perhaps within 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, you can have those skills that you can start to be employed gainfully in this area. But that's the base. Then the medium-term opportunity is the creation of intellectual property. Right now, we get the job, we do the animation work, and we send it away. That's not our property. But in the creation of our intellectual property, who here has seen Cabby Chronicles? Raise your hands, have you seen Cabby Chronicles? Now, whether you like it, you don't like it, you should be proud of it. Yes? Because that is Jamaica's own work. It is currently being exported to 7 countries globally. And there are contracts I can't speak because it's the people in private business. I don't want to fasten them business. But they have several contracts to get it going elsewhere. And that is something that we have created. Their product will go further than any coffee we have produced in Jamaica. Yes? So that's a fantastic opportunity for us. So we need to move to the next stage. Once we start to build a pool and create that critical mass, we now create that intellectual property that we now can get into the other areas. The writing, for example, that animation, there's no resemblance to the mark of myself. We declare that in that little clip that we showed. Now, there is the writing, yes? There are so many other elements, the designers, the illustrators, that are part of a full-fledged industry. So we're just at the tip. We're just getting a little taste of the honey. But there's so much more to be had. And if we pursue along this path, then we can expand and develop and create a bona fide industry that will help to create a lot more employment for our people. Now, of course, within that, now we have to think about structure. And then we now have our Mr. Jackson over there, who he is the leader in this element of I saw it from my peripheral vision. You have to show everybody, yes. But his role as with Jan, Jamaica Animation Network, he will now help to create that industry. So when JAMPRO is interfacing with them, we don't have to interface with 500 people. We interface with an industry, and as you know, any well-designed and well-developed industry has their own trade organization. The accountants, they have the ICAJ, the lawyers, the medical professionals. Each industry sector has their own group. They have the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, the Jamaica Exporters Association. So in time, this association will start to fulfill the need and now become the focal point for the persons to provide training and for the development of that industry so we can move together. We have done this right, Jamaica, and I think we should applaud ourselves. This is not the scrap metal industry. Yes? We have developed and we have done this thing correctly, and we should all be proud. Then, of course, longer term, and the challenge has been put out to us by our first speaker for the development of a gaming industry. So you start, you have to creep before you walk, and then you start to run and then you become Usain Bolt. So this is where we are on that trajectory. So we are certainly on that right path. Now, gaming overview, I'm going to jump beyond this. Oops, I seem to be going the wrong direction. My apologies. Then we want to talk about the outsourcing of the animation industry. The global animation outsourcing industry is estimated to be US $68 billion, growing at 12.5% annually. The rapid advances in animation now allow greater collaboration across borders. So in other words, when I see this, I now think of the logistics hub, where Jamaica, through its initiative, can be part and integrate well within the global supply chain of these other companies. So where the world is moving away is not now just selling our coffee, our ginger, our rum, but now selling whatever we make or manufacture or process that fits into what somebody else is making. And they are maybe global leaders, so as they grow, our business will grow. This is also perfectly happening right here. Now, India, Korea, and the Philippines, traditional outsourcing destinations, as I mentioned earlier, they are now developing the IP for their own audiences, reducing their availability for outsourcing. So remember, I threw that little trick question about 3,000, 5,000, is that a lot? 5,000 is not really much, considering that there's an excess demand for 35,000 animators worldwide. This again parallels what is happening in the shipping industry, where there are demand for over 43,000 mariners that globally cannot be supplied. So your opportunity then, you can go into shipping, you can go into animation. There are jobs out there for our youth that with the proper technical skills, they can take on to themselves. Now, looking animation and gaming in Jamaica, we have 4 privately owned studios, 3 created between 2010 and 2012. Many independent self-taught animators, many small shops that operate informally. And we now have courses, as I mentioned, Carimac. They're having their 6-month course. Then their next cohort will begin soon. We will have Edna Manley that will soon be offering courses within a couple months. We also have UTech. We'll be offering 1-month train-the-trainer courses. So what is happening that there are other institutions that are now seeing the opportunity to be able to provide services. And what is happening perhaps for the first time in our marketplace, where academia and industry are working hand and glove. And this is really fantastic, because it means that we're not producing, I mean, there is a place for someone with a master's degree in Latin. There's no doubt about that. Yes? But there's a demand for other skills. And if we can fit the demand for the skills with the amount of persons that are being trained, then as a country, we are on the right path. Correct? So, one of the things then we want to look at, why Jamaica? What's so special about Jamaica? Mark mentioned the word near shore. It pops up when discussions about the logistics hub. It pops up in discussions around the contact center. Simply means that we are near to our major market. It means that you're speaking to someone in New York. There's at worst a 1 hour time difference. Not 5 hours, not 8 hours. Yes? So it makes the speed of business working well. Again, this is a business that thrives on very tight timelines. The fact that we speak English or some version of English, very similar to what our other markets speak, means that communication also works very well. Our communication platform, I'm not going to get political, but remember certain politicians talk about you can take one phone and call yourself without a phone and say hello, hello. That telecommunications infrastructure is also fantastic, because what it means now is that you're able to send files from here to your customer. They give you feedback and you send that files, and all that can be done very, very easily. Then we do have the level of increasing IP skills. Logistics, cultural similarities. Again, we recognize the United States as the largest market. So there are, in fact, cultural similarities that really makes for very good partnership. We can speak a few more things like this, but of course my time is running away, so I'm not going to spend much time there. But the fact is that we do have a pool of talented people. And what organizations know is that at this time in Jamaica's history, unlike any other, your ability to find talented people at short notice is the very best. We also therefore have persons who can segue into new careers. Persons who are writing in communication, writing for the print newspaper, they can also now try their hand in writing print for animation. There are a lot of opportunities. We just need to expand our horizons and look at those opportunities a little different. I'd perhaps want to just spend a moment and speak about the key players, how this all works together. We need government to create the enabling legislation and policies, and any industry needs this. This is not unique to this area. We need our animation society, Mr. Jackson and his team, to help to be the standard bearer of the standards for this area. We need to have the studios. This is where the work comes from. This is where the quality work that can be branded Brand Jamaica comes from. This is critical. And then we need the educational institutions to provide that pool of very knowledgeable and worthy and useful persons to going into that industry. I think I'll pause at this point in time, but just to point out that JAMPRO stands ready to assist persons in this particular area. We have been having quite a few conversations. We are looking even for grant funding. We're looking for the sort of support from our various partners to really expand that pie. And then as that base expands, we spend time and doing our various development programs to help persons to move up and become leaders and managers in the industry. It has been my pleasure to address this group today, and I look forward to future and further conversations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Robert, for your presentation. expounding on JAMPRO philosophy and thought leadership with respect to the development of gaming and animation in Jamaica. All right, let's now move to the actual people who do the work, the practitioners. Kevin Jackson from the Jamaica Animation Nation, I think that rolls off the tongue so nicely, to come and share his perspectives with us. We have to catch up with some time. As Kevin makes his way to the lectern, if you're feeling a little hungry, plans are downstairs. There's lots of food downstairs, so plan to purchase tickets at the registration desk for lunch after this session. So, Kevin, over to you.
Okay, great. This is short people compatible, thanks. All right, I don't know how I'm going to top these two presenters. These guys went really deep, especially into the numbers game. I'm going to try and give you guys a break from the numbers game. My presentation is going to be a bit short. Also, I have a lingering cough, so if you hear me clearing my throat, pretty often, please bear with me. Thank you. All right, so as I said, my presentation isn't as deep as these guys. I'm giving you a perspective from, I guess, an animator. This is the clicker, right? All right, let's see. Okay. All right, so we're talking about IP animation and gaming, and I'm going to get into a little bit of how it works. But before I get into how it works, last year there was this animated movie that came out. I'm not sure if any of you watched it, or maybe you took your kids to watch it. It was a Disney movie called Frozen. How many of you watched this movie? Okay, lots of hands. Are you sure you watched this movie? Or this movie? Right. So this is the actual Disney movie, Frozen. So then that movie I showed you before, what was that, right? It's a movie called Legend of Sarilla. Now what happened with this movie is that it's a small studio called Phase 4 Films. They developed a movie, the story is different. There are some similarities, but for the most part the story is different. But when they released, the movie didn't do very well. So they took the strange decision to copy the branding from Disney's movie Frozen to try and capitalize on that wave. And of course, Disney ended up suing Phase 4 Films because, of course, they're going to be causing brand confusion. You can imagine the disappointment on some kids' face when their parents took them to watch Frozen Land instead of Frozen, right? And I mean, you'd be that embarrassed parent with the child kicking and screaming behind you when you're leaving the theater. And of course, as a result of this brand confusion, there is also brand reputation to think about, because even though the movie Legend of Sarilla had a good story, I mean, I watched it and I actually enjoyed it. Even more so than Frozen, the animation is not as good. Now, you can imagine if somebody actually went to Frozen Land thinking it was a Disney movie. Some people would be like, boy, the animation fall off from Disney, man, they're really cheaping this thing out, right? That's affecting their reputation. And of course, it's going to result in loss of revenue. You might have some fans that just say, boy, Disney now going to do nothing again, and them stop watching Disney movies. Or, of course, some of the moviegoers went to Frozen Land instead, so, taking away money there. So, let me just get into some definitions now. Intellectual property. Some of this David talked about already in great detail, but I'm just going to run over it briefly. A copyright that consists of a bundle of rights held by an author of literary, musical, dramatic, or artistic works. Now, in terms of animation and games, what this means, all games and animations pretty much have a storyline. So your script is something that definitely has to be protected. And as a writer myself, I know that firsthand. If someone steals your script, they pretty much steal the lifeblood of your animation or your game. Also the code. The code is very important. I code as well, and I can tell you if your code gets stolen or somebody accidentally sends your code to somebody they shouldn't have sent it to, maybe a rival company, you're pretty much giving away the secret behind your game, right? The gameplay or even the way the game integrates with a console. You might find that one game company has the amazing abilities and stuff, serious graphics and gameplay into a console that doesn't have that many resources. I mean, I think it's like comparing PlayStation and Xbox. PlayStation for a long while has had, a lot of better graphics and gameplay than the Xbox, even though the Xbox has larger specs. And that's primarily due to the programmers who found nifty ways to figure out the background of the system. Of course, in all animation and games, music is involved as well. And, being a musical country, we definitely should be taking IP seriously. And of course, the artwork. The artwork, that as well is, without the artwork, there's no animation or gaming really and truly. As David showed us with, those great sports games, the characters have been getting more realistic as time goes along. And even though, some of it you might have like some, motion capturing and stuff, there's still someone who has to model, they have to draw, model, sculpt these figures to put in the games or in the animation, etc. Moving on now. So who owns a copyright? Pretty much any creator or author of any of the aforementioned types of work that can be demonstrated in copy, as physical or documented form, you are the owner of the copyright, whether registered or not. But registering your copyright now, that's important in terms of, if you have to fight a battle, for example, somebody steals your work, you can easily prove it. If you haven't registered it, then it's a little bit more difficult to prove, and then you'll get into, a longer battle in court over it. But at the end of the day, you're still the owner. If you draw something on a piece of paper, it's yours. How long does a copyright last? 50 years after the life of the creator. This stuff was pulled from JAIPO's website, so you can get into more details about with them. Let's move on to trademark now, which is another important thing, which David had mentioned earlier. Trademark, according to the Trademark Act of 1999, states that any sign or mark that can be graphically represented or recognized with the trade of goods or services of one undertaking over another. So, just like the logo for EA games, is easily identifiable. You see that logo anywhere, there's a certain level of quality associated with that brand. Someone else copying that logo, that will result in, some issues. So trademark is one form of protecting your brand's reputation. Let me get into what consists of a trademark. A sign can be a trademark, a name, shapes, combination of colors, a design, a combination of all the above. And then we have designs. Now, a design relates to the features of shape, configuration, pattern, or ornamentation, which, when applied to a product, gives the product a unique appearance. A registered design can be a valuable commercial asset. Registration of a design gives the owner protection for the visual appearance of the product, but not how the product works. Now, this applies to for example, in animation and gaming, and I'm going to use Hasbro as an example. Hasbro is a company that created Transformers, G.I. Joes, those animations. And a spin-off from that are the toys. Well, I believe the toys came first. The animations were really marketing tools for the toys. If you really check it out, sometimes the animation themselves cost more to make than what they actually make back from the animations, but the toys make a lot of money. Right? And now the shape of these toys, the designs on them, logos, all of those things, would fall under this form of protection. And pretty much this, well, as I mentioned, it can be used as an asset because, these toys are physical things, they have value. And you can use this, to acquire loans or investments, that sort of thing, because once there's a demand for it, like in the case of Transformers or G.I. Joes, once there's a demand for it, you can essentially use this as an asset, to acquire investment. Investors will look and go, well, I see the potential of this, I'm willing to put some money into it, blah, blah, blah. Of course, if you have something that's, not so in demand, then of course, it'll be a little bit more difficult to get investment, but yeah. Now, how does this all make money, really and truly? Well, as I said before, we have protection, licensing, royalties, licensing and royalties are sort of overlapped, and competitive advantage, and as I mentioned earlier, assets. Now, in terms of protection, with the example I showed before with Frozen, right? It protects you from, it protects you from things being stolen from you. There was also a game that's been very popular in the news recently called Floppy Birds. I don't know if anybody knows that game. Okay, great. Very popular game. The guy was making 50,000 US a day off of that game, off of downloads, and it's an independent gamer. And the thing with it is that he used a lot of elements that look very similar to the game Mario Brothers. So he took the game down, and everybody's wondering, why did he take this game down? $50,000 a day beats me. But speculation is that Nintendo was putting him under pressure. Not sure if it's true, but sometimes with these legal battles, your lawyers will advise you not to say anything, and Nintendo might want to try and amicably, squash this thing, just tell him to remove it and everything's cool. In the case of Frozen Land, it wasn't that easy, but, still, it was a bit amicable because I think Phase 4 only had to pay 100,000 US, and they had to pull all of the DVDs for that movie and rebrand it back to, Legend of Sarilla. Now, it sounds like small numbers, but what if it was the other way around? What if you were the small company that came up with this big idea and a big company stole it from you? No, legal ramifications, you'd probably be ending up with way more money than that. But it basically protects you, from your work being stolen. And with licensing, as my colleagues mentioned before, when you have the rights to your artwork, your story, your code, all of these things, it allows you to now license out your work. And the thing why it's important to license, as opposed to just letting any and anybody use your stuff. There's a brand reputation, as I said before. You want to ensure that you're entrusting your work to somebody who can maintain the quality. So, for example, with the outsourcing, companies will be outsourcing to India, or they'll be outsourcing to Jamaica, GSW. And the thing is that the company that's outsourcing to you, they're going to want to know that you can produce the level of quality that their fan base expects to see, right? And this is where licensing is important. Royalties, of course, this comes in terms of the use of your product. There are some fair use circumstances, like even in this case where we're putting up logos and all of that for a presentational purpose. That's fair use. But then when you're putting it out into the market, there are royalties to consider. Permission, as I believe it was David said, permission. If we don't get permission, then of course, again, legal ramifications. But all of these are ways of making money from your intellectual property. And of course, there's a competitive advantage. This actually falls under protection, but what it specifically pertains to is ensuring that when you come to market, you are ahead of the game. You don't want to come up with something, and this happens a lot. Sometimes you come up with something, and somebody else comes up with something remarkably similar. Right? This happens a lot in inventions, and you don't register that invention. Someone else comes to market before you. There's no protection. And I give you an example. I think it was the inventor of the light bulb. Somebody else went and registered it first, so that person got the recognition for it. And anyway, sorry, dry mouth. So back to competitive advantage. Essentially, you've come up with a story, you've come up with an animation, you've come up with a game. You register all of this stuff. If someone comes out with an extremely similar story, I mean remarkably similar, to the point where it looks like they've copied you completely, and even the characters look similar, everything, this offers you protection to basically prevent this person from going ahead. Because suppose this person has more money than you and can get to market first, then you're pretty much dead in the water if you're an independent agent and you don't have that much money, and it's probably going to take you a year to come out with your game versus this person that's copying you come out in 3 months and you're pretty much dead in the water. And while I'm not going to get into assets again, I mentioned that before, but essentially, that's pretty much it. So what I want to leave you guys with, in my conclusion here, is protect your ideas because they're worth protecting. Right? Ideas without protection are pretty much just ideas. You need to get them on paper. You need to, document them. Don't dream up an idea and go, oh, I have an idea, and then when somebody else come up with an idea, you go, oh, them thief my idea. Like, it really don't matter. It don't work that way. You need to write it down, document it, register it. And yep, that's all, folks. Yep. Me.
Thank you very much. Okay. Was that your animation there, Kevin? Okay. Excellent. Well, we've just heard from Kevin Jackson, PR Director, Jamaica Animation Nation Network, and just a sampling of the fabulous talent that we have in Jamaica and across the Caribbean that's ready to be exported to the world. And Robert, we're going to change from rest of the world, so soon they'll be talking about the Caribbean. All right, our next speaker, just before he comes up, he sat for an interview a few weeks ago. It's on YouTube and everything, and I think it kind of gives a little context to the studio side of the animation business in the country. So we're profiling Wayne Sinclair and GSW as a Jamaican business success. And so let's hear Wayne in his own words during that interview.
Typical Saturday morning cartoons, 80% of those cartoons are actually produced in other territories outside of the United States and Canada. So what we're doing is we're sort of using the technological platform that's available with respect to digital animation production and bringing some of that work to our shores. Animation, obviously, as an industry is not new, but the way in which it is being done now and the way in which the workflow is being shared internationally certainly is new. That is what is allowing us to be able to have the opportunities to participate in this global industry. So we're now about to embark on our second international project. The first one was with a company called Studio Red out of France. It was for a project that we had Disney Junior in France and the host countries. And now we are ramping up our production on a much bigger project. Year in entertainment out of Spain, and that's a 5-country co-production deal in Spain, Jamaica, Italy, Luxembourg, and Ireland. Companies from each of those countries are participating in different parts of the process, so the creative process, distribution, financing, and of course in terms of Jamaica, us on the production side, and that's for a 52-episode production schedule for about 30 months. So those are two big international contracts that we worked on, and of course we also done a lot of local work for Jamaica Stock Exchange, Garrett's, CFC, University of West Indies, International Organization of Migration. So we've done a lot of institutional work locally as well. JAMPRO just has been there as a support mechanism for the industry and for private sector companies like ourselves. It was JAMPRO that got us involved with the motion picture recognition status application that allows us certain incentives with respect to bringing materials that went to the meeting, and that's going to become real handy in a couple of months as we ramp up this project. JAMPRO has played a critical role to us as a private sector company and to the development of the industry as a whole as well.
Wow. What a setup. Thank you so much for that. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. You know, when Mike started out, he said that, you know, he always gets a chance to go first. And I always happen to seem to get the chance to go last. Now, there are some advantages to that because you get the opportunity to be very brief because you're usually under pressure from our moderator, given time constraints. But also because by now, everyone that has gone before you has said everything that you're going to say. And in some cases, exactly what you're going to say. But what it does do, though, is it reinforces the message. And what you'll find is that there are common themes that have been highlighted by all the speakers previous to me, and I will highlight them again. And inclusive of those are clearly the opportunities that exist for us in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean in this excellent industry, animation and gaming, and that there's some things that we just need to put in place to ensure that we continue to sustain the advantages. So we're just waiting for the presentation to queue up. What I also would hope is that after we're all finished, that we can engage in a very spirited conversation about not just the legal aspects, the numbers, but again, how we transform ourselves from this nascent industry to something that is, again, sustainable. All right, so the global animation industry comes to the Caribbean. Just again, reiterating some of the numbers, in 2014, it's estimated that the total value of the global animation industry is going to approach somewhere in the region of $250 billion US worldwide. And that's a number that's different depending on the studies that you see. But the consistency is somewhere between 200 and 250 billion by the end of 2014. Some of the key opportunities that exist, you know, in terms of the two major ones are outsourcing and service work, and the creation and distribution of intellectual property. And I won't go into detail because I think we all understand what we mean when we talk about outsourcing. Essentially, as was mentioned before, you know, 80% of the cartoons that you see on Saturday morning, for example, are outsourced to countries like India, the Philippines, and Korea, and so on. And that has been made possible by the technological advances that has happened in how you actually create animated content. So as a lot of those territories start to produce more and more of their own IP, there is an increasing opportunity for other territories like Jamaica and the wider Caribbean to take on some of that work because the general demand for animation services are growing and the supply of those services are shrinking. So it's within that gap that Jamaica and the wider Caribbean can step in and take advantage of the opportunities that exist. But that's not a very sustainable model because you have to at least assume when you're in the private sector that there's always somebody else around the corner that's willing to come in and undercut you and undercut your price. So as we develop this industry of outsourcing and service work, we also have to develop on a parallel front the development of our own intellectual property, because I think a slide from an earlier presenter, showed that I think it was, you know, a Disney Daffy Duck or something like that is still earning revenues today. So cartoons that a lot of us grew up with are still earning revenues today and present perpetual earnings streams and revenue streams. And this is the way in which you sustain this industry, is again by developing and distributing your own IP. There's a lot that was mentioned earlier about the gaming industry, but also applications for animation are increasing in the area of education. Because more and more what you're finding is that animation is not being used just in terms of the courseware, whereby, you know, young persons who can identify more with animation are being presented with animation in the courseware itself. But animation is also being used as a teaching tool. So, for example, you will find where, for example, the rain cycle is taught in your geography class, and then those students are sent to the art department to actually animate the rain cycle. So actually draw the ocean, draw the sun, draw the mountains, and so on. And by animating that process, it resonates much more and sticks much more to them. So you're finding that animation is being used as a tool, as a teaching tool, as well as something that is presented in courseware. And that, again, is a global trend. And most of you would have heard as well here in Jamaica that the e-learning program is going to be, and I think Mr. Phillips is here, so he can tell us some more about that. I'd like to talk to him. But the e-learning program is going to be moving more and more towards incorporating animation in courseware and the educational process. Just a little bit about the human resources. Now, it's kind of hard and difficult to really put a finger, an accurate finger, on what the total human resource complement of animators are in Jamaica. Probably the best measure so far, I would say, comes from my previous speaker, Jamaica Animation Nation. They are a grouping, an advocacy grouping of the animation industry in Jamaica, the most organized one so far. They have a Facebook page that boasts over 700 members. Now, that's not to say that there are necessarily 700 animators among that grouping, but it clearly is an indication of persons who, yes, are animators, but also persons who have a deep interest in getting to be in the animation industry, whether they be hobbyists, actual professionals, or just persons, as I said, with an interest in getting into the industry. So that's a very rough number of the kind of human resource complement that exists in Jamaica. But in terms of those that are actually professionals in the industry, it would be a fraction of that, probably even less than 10%. Most of these persons are self-taught, which speaks to some of the weaknesses that we have in the development of the industry today. The Adobe Flash platform seems to be the platform of choice. It's easily accessible, and it's also the platform that is used most frequently with respect to web applications, which is where a lot of the animation so far has been developed and promulgated. There are some educational institutions, the Edna Manley School for the Visual and Performing Arts, for example, the foremost visual and performing arts institution in the Caribbean. I know they are in the process of developing an animation module. The University of the West Indies, it was said earlier, just graduated its first complement of animation industry course. And I know there are others. The Heart Trust NTA is very much advanced in putting together their animation curriculum and course. So while we are a little behind the game, we're definitely catching up in terms of putting in the educational infrastructure. And you have some persons that are trained and have been trained in overseas institutions like the Savannah College of Art and Design, as well as the Vancouver Film School and others. So what you have is a mix of persons that are hobbyists, that are self-taught, and educational institutions that are now coming into the mix to help with that raw materials training, and then an even much smaller number of persons who were trained overseas. Let's take a look now more at the infrastructure, because as a private sector person, is this tall man compatible? Great. So as a private sector person, this is something that is of great interest to us, because you need supportive infrastructure, not just for my company to grow, but for the industry in general to grow. And as the industry grows, so will the individual companies in it. No company can really go this road by itself. So obviously, we know you need some basic equipment. You need, I mentioned earlier, education and training. You also need some government support. And in that vein, one of the most significant developments that has happened for the industry, in favor of the industry, is that the Secure Transactions Act was passed in Parliament, I think, in November, late last year. And what that does is it now allows persons who are the creators of intellectual property to be able to use that intellectual property as a collateralizable asset. One of the challenges that especially small business persons in this industry and the creative industries in general has faced is, whether it be banks, financial institutions, or even equity investors, have just not had an idea as to how to value intellectual property, and whether intellectual property is even an asset that is collateralizable or bankable. With the passage of this legislation, we have taken a significant step forward to solve that problem. So that was a really important step. We had a presentation from JAMPRO in that incredible setup earlier. I already spoke to the help in which JAMPRO has given, and I encourage you to pepper Mr. Scott with questions after this is all done, because I know he has all the answers with respect to exactly some of the specifics that JAMPRO has been working on in terms of the international marketing and market access opportunities that's so really important for this industry to grow. So when those questions come, I'll just step aside and allow Mr. Scott to step in and take the charge there. Yeah, it looks like it's stuck. All right. What's also been happening is multilateral collaboration. The World Bank has been very instrumental in this. They came on board in early last year recognizing the opportunity and the unique position that Jamaica has for the advancement of the industry. And it is through the World Bank that Kingston, Jamaica's first, well, I don't know if it's the first, but certainly the largest animation festival came about. And that was last year. And I'm going to show you a little animated clip that was created by another studio in Jamaica called Skyrays for Kingston. And in the interest of intellectual property protection, you'll see Skyrays' logo right down there on the bottom. Kingston was very significant. You know, in the space of less than 2 or 3 months, there were over 4,000 likes generated on the Facebook page. Over 600 young persons were in attendance over the 2 days for Kingston, which far surpassed expectations. Over 120 creative industries. I remember in the planning process, we all thought that if we had gotten 20 creative entries in storyboarding, animation, and so on, that would have been considered a success. We got over 120 entries from across the Caribbean. And we got a lot of good international media coverage from the likes of the Washington Post, the Times, the Miami Herald, and the Huffington Post. So what that did is it really put the world on notice that Jamaica was taking the animation industry serious, and it really put Jamaica's animation industry on the map in an international light. And I know others will agree. I know we as a company certainly benefited from it by just emails and persons calling, saying that they saw us, heard about us, and it has resulted in additional opportunities that we probably would not have gotten had we not gotten that intervention and the staging of Kingston. So the Caribbean, another intervention that's happening, because I think it's important for us to see that things are happening on a multilateral level. The Caribbean Animation Cluster Project is a program that's sponsored by the IDB. It is involving 3 studios from 3 different countries throughout the Caribbean. And they'll be receiving grant financing for capacity building, training, and market access opportunities. And the idea is to create a Caribbean cluster, or a cluster of animation companies that will have a global representation in a very centralized way. So part of this cluster initiative is also going to be the development of a secretariat that will be able to provide services for the animation industry, specifically in the areas of market access opportunity, as well as access to training, and as well as the development of standards, so that as the Caribbean industry puts its foot forward to the world, there will be some sort of guarantee of standardization, if you will, of the quality of animation that's coming out of the region, because that's critically important. It's a very small world, it's a very small industry, and it's important for us both from an animation and gaming standpoint to understand that as we put that foot forward, it's in all of our best interests to ensure that all the players are conforming to a particular standard, and that that standard is of the highest quality and globally accepted levels. So the Caribbean Animation Cluster Project is going to go a significant way to ensuring that that happens. And the impact of this, obviously, and hopefully, is that you will have studios that will pop up throughout the Caribbean and be able to act and coordinate their activities in a very collaborative way. As I mentioned earlier, the technology exists for an unprecedented level of collaboration to take place. So as individual countries and as individual territories, we will never be able to compete with, you know, the 1.7 billion population of China, the 1 billion population of India, and so on. But as a collective, and by offering specialized services, especially going higher up the value chain, given the technology that exists, we can definitely make a very substantial impact in carving out a piece of the pie of the global animation industry. I mentioned a little earlier some of the challenges that we have faced with respect to financing, because this business is not cheap, right? And there are significant barriers to entry. Tremendous respect has to be given to the Exim Bank and the Development Bank of Jamaica. They were with us from day one. And in fact, had they not come on board, had they not seen the vision from day one, I mean, I think I can safely say that we probably wouldn't exist at the level that we've existed today. So I think I saw some representatives from Exim here earlier, not to set them up, but if you want to, you can just approach Valerie Crawford right over there to get a little bit more information. Very helpful, very instrumental, and have continued to work with us as we grow and develop. So they've been a key financial partner with us as long as the Development Bank of Jamaica. Private sector financing has been, you see that arrow is a little wiggly, a little bit more tricky of a road, but the arrow is pointing upward. And what that means is that the private sector financial institutions are now also starting to understand the value of intellectual property and are now starting to look more favorably at this industry. So take heart, my creative industries sistren and brethren. There's light at the end of what has been a very long and dark tunnel. But it's interesting to understand why that tunnel has been so long and dark, right? There's been a traditional historical disconnect between the creative industries and the financial sector. There's been a sense on the part of the financial sector, and I think someone started off by saying we could call this fun and games. Very telling there. But that's kind of how the creative industries has always been perceived. Fun and games. This thing not really serious. This thing not really real. So there has had to have been a very painstaking educational process on the part of creative industries practitioners to just let the financial sector know that this is not just fun and games. It's a real industry with real economic impact and real economic opportunities. But to be frank, we in the creative industries have also had a little bit of work to do as well. We have traditionally in some sectors, not everyone, acted informally. So things like business plans, timely financial statements, and that sort of thing have been difficult to come by from time to time. But that's the language of business. And if it is that you're looking to seek financial partnerships, you must regularize and organize yourselves to speak that particular language. Fortunately, that gap is now closing. That disconnect is now becoming more connected. And I'm very enthusiastic and hopeful that we will see more and more private sector financial activity, and not just debt, but equity financing, because debt financing can be very costly and act as a constraint to growth and development, unless it's really low-cost financing from the Exim Bank. But it's important, though, for equity financing to come into the game as well, and I think we're seeing more and more of that happening. There's been a macroeconomic perfect storm with DX1 and DX2. There's been a lot of conservatism on the part of our financial institutions. So that has also served to constrain investment. And there's also the notion that this is a greenfield industry. We don't really have as much of a culture of venture capital in Jamaica to help out. So anything that is new, the sense is, well, let's see you be successful first before we invest. But you can't really achieve success before the investment. So it's definitely a chicken and the egg situation. But again, I'm confident that some of those barriers are being broken down. So what are some of the industry prospects and opportunities? Well, I'll just run through this slide because most of this has already been spoken about. A couple of the ones that I will point to, though, is the fact that we don't underestimate our cultural relevance to some of the key service demanders. The fact that we speak the same language, but the fact that we also understand a lot of the same lingo, the same colloquialisms is very important, because especially in the area of animation, when you're trying to animate a phrase like, you're so busted, it it's a little easier for us to understand the facial expressions and what goes into animating something like that than somebody in India or China that just sees the words, "You are so busted." So they will take forever to figure out just how to get those kind of facial expressions, whereas it will take us less time to do so. Additionally, when an India or a China are 13, 14 hours ahead, and that technical director comes to work in Los Angeles at 9 o'clock, and he sees a problem with the animation work that has been submitted to him by his Indian co-production partners, those Indian partners have already gone to bed for the night. So he has to wait the entire day and not until the next day, because by the time he's ready to go home, they're just waking up in India and they're just getting a sense of what those corrections are that need to be made. So he doesn't see the result of his input to those corrections until the very next day. And if they don't get that, then it's not until the next day till they actually get it right. So we have some real advantages both in terms of our geography and our culture that will sort of stand and bode really well for us as we seek to continue in this industry. Let me speak to some of the specific opportunities though. The Simpsons. Anybody ever heard of The Simpsons? Yeah? Huh? Okay. Carl's family. All right, well, speaking about financing for Carl's family, Simpsons has probably produced over 550 episodes. 24 million DVDs have been sold. And the total value of the franchise has been in excess of $12 billion US, Carl. So I'm going to be talking to you after this presentation. If anybody knows anybody under the age of, say, 10, you would know this next character here, Dora. Dora has been sold in over 100. Well, there you go. That's more than me. You're forced to watch it. 140 territories, 33 different languages, 20 million DVDs, 50 million books, and this is all since the year 2001. And they also have a franchise value in excess of $12 billion US. So if you want to talk about the value of IP, of course, these are the top of the top. I don't need to do $20 billion worth of revenue to be happy. I don't know about anybody else in the room. We can shoot for it, right? But, you know, give me just a fraction of that, and I am happy. Just give me 1% or less than 1% of that, and I am super cool. A little closer to home, just a little. I don't know how many people know this franchise, Rasta Mouse. Rasta Mouse is about 4 years old. It airs on CBeebies, which is the BBC's children's channel. And already in that period of time, Rasta Mouse has racked up a pretty impressive list of merchandising and licensing partners. I don't have on my glasses, so I can't see them all, but I know that like EMI, Universal on the music front, Vogue, and you can see all of the different categories, everything from bed sheets, of course, books, music. I mean, and that's just in 4 years. And this is a product that, well, Rasta Mouse, right? The Scare Them crew, looking to make a good thing bad. Unfortunately, it's not owned by Jamaicans, all right? But it can be. Something like this can definitely be. The distribution platforms that exist now and all the opportunities and the different platforms that exist make the barriers to entry, the barriers to getting your IP out there much, much less than it used to be, right? Somebody mentioned Angry Birds. Right now, it's a fact that, you know, companies like the Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, they're really scaling back their creative departments because they don't have to create. They just need to troll YouTube and see which animated content is getting 1 million, 2 million, 3 million views. They just go to those persons, license them, and that's it. Their marketing has already been done. Their pre-launch and everything has already been done. The risk associated with the development and distribution of IP has been taken out because they now have all these access to all these different platforms and all these different modes of looking at how things are done. All right, so wrapping up, what is needed? We still need to continue with ongoing education and training, again, ensuring that we get to that high quality level, let people understand the importance of protecting intellectual property and respecting intellectual property and the opportunities associated with the administration and distribution of intellectual property. We need to consider or continue with the private sector financing opportunities. Legislation and incentives. One of the biggest challenges that we have with respect to our competition overseas is the fact that they offer incentives, and we need to get creative about the kind of incentives that we offer. Continued multilateral support and engagement. And this last one is probably the most critical. We need to continue to develop a culture of innovation. Innovation in the way we do everything. Innovation in the way we finance. Innovation in the way we create content. Innovation in the way we look at the distribution of content. We need to develop this innovation culture in the country. And as I said, also looking more and more at venture capital. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but I feel somebody tugging on my shirt, my pants, and everything else. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much. I'll leave it there.
Now, I know you must be punch drunk with information, but it's been great information. Agreed? And I know you're hungry as well. But we have permission for another 10 minutes or so for a few questions and interactions. So don't all rush to the microphone at once. Any questions? Quick comment? Yes, Dorothy. But I think they need to record it, so you may need to go to the mic. This is Dorothy Cunningham, one of our world-renowned dramatists and maven of stage and silver screen, making her way to the microphone. And I saw another gentleman, so you're next.
Okay. Yes, hi to all the presenters, and thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge and this very valuable information. And this morning, I can tell you, I have been re-energized, and I am so hopeful that out of all of this, we of the cultural aspect arena will be seeing a bright light that is not the train. The actors and the writers need more work. And so I am putting it out there, like the voiceovers for the animation and the writing of scripts, etc. Please, please, please remember that we are here. We are very low-keyed, but we are also in need of more work. Thank you so much.
So Wayne, that's a yes from you, and Mr. Jackson, you'll hire talent, more local talent. Yes, sir. Please identify.
If I may just make a quick comment.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, so I think what you said is really so powerful, because what happens a lot is we are a lot of self-employed people. We're doing something and we're doing our project, and too often we do it alone. We don't work with collaboration. And I think if we all work together, then the overall output and quality could be better. But if you're there focusing on doing the animation, doing the scripting, doing the other things, then there's a finite amount of time. And if you're working with deadlines, that's not going to work so well. So I would certainly encourage persons to consider looking at the other professionals, because this is an opportunity for them to expand their professional selves and also to add a lot of value to the output that you're producing.
Yes, thank you for underscoring the Hawkins principle on creative ecology. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, please identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Kamar Somas. I would like to ask Mr. It's really a question pertaining, directed to Mr. Jackson. You mentioned about the competitive advantage. What I gather is that it's a first, you get your thing registered quickly to have a competitive edge, in case if it's a product by an author or someone who may have produced it before or created it before. What I'm asking, is there anything in place that can protect a newcomer or a new player that, you know, we don't replicate something that's already existed?
Okay.
Go ahead. I
Great.
think it's fine.
Yeah. In terms of locally, there are ways to protect yourself. One is, well, for example, with your script. I know for the longest while, one method was the what would they call a poor man's copy, where you pretty much registered mail.
Well, we have
the city itself.
JAPRO.
However,
JAPRO, Kevin.
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. I like to give a little bit of history so that people understand where we're coming from and how much leaps and bounds JAPRO has made. So now you can actually register with JAPRO. You can register your work with JAPRO. This goes not just for copyright, but trademarks as well and so on. All right, come back.
What I was asking, how would you know that you actually have?
Well, the thing is, when you're registering, they'll do research.
Okay, that's
yeah.
what
They'll do research. They have to do
maybe
research.
Internet, use some search engine or something.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Also, there's one. The thing with copyright right now, and I guess I can be corrected by JAPO if this is not so, is that our copyright pretty much mostly pertains to, our region, Jamaica. But I know there's the Madrid Protocol, which might be signed soon. I've heard rumors that they might be signed soon, and that will actually allow us to copyright in several countries from just this one location. So,
Okay, I think we need some legal support here. I see Lily Claire. Let the lawyer speak. Lily Claire.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to say, I understood what you were saying. To register your copyright, it's automatic once it comes in a tangible form. The expression of your idea in a tangible form. However, what JAPO is going to be doing is that we're going to have a digitized system where you can submit your work to us. You will make the voluntary declaration to say that you are the authentic owner. We're not going behind the veil. We don't have that ability. So you come to us, you tell us this is your work, and you sign to say it is your work, and you get a JP to witness your signature, a justice of the peace.
Yeah,
Then we put it's going to be digitized. So I need a piece of paper. We won't have anything tangible, okay? It will be there in our system. So because as it is now, when people call and we explain to them that you just have to send it back to yourself by registered mail, and that's only for the purposes of evidence. So that's when you go to court, you have something, because you don't have to have it. It's just the evidence why you do the poor man's copyright. So after all these years of people saying we need something, we're allowing them to do it. So we actually started, and you mentioned the Edna Manley College. We've actually started with the Edna Manley College for the Visual and Performing Arts, where they are depositing their works with us. Madrid now is about trademarks, a horse of a different color. So basically, with the Madrid system, it's going to facilitate, it will be easier for you to have your trademark protected in a number of jurisdictions. But you can come to our JAPO desk and we'll give you all the details. Thank you.
Thank you for that intervention, Lily. I notice the line is getting long. I hope I can take everybody. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Rochelle Gordon. I'm from the University of the West Indies Western Campus, so I traveled all the way here just for this. And I'm super stoked to see Mr. Greenspan from NAMCO. Tekken was like one of my grow-up favorite games, so that's pretty awesome. Mr. Sinclair, you mentioned before about a collective animation hub going on in the Caribbean. So like in the next 7 to 10 years or so, I acknowledge that we have like recent attempts to institutionalize formal animation programs. You guys, we've had animation on TV and we've been given outsourcing services and all that. Are you saying that the only way that we could have competitive advantage in the animation industry is by becoming a collective hub?
Oh, no, not at all. I'm saying that the cluster initiative is something that will enhance the process of becoming essentially a little bit more globally competitive, so that it allows us to be collective in our efforts, so you get economies of scale, right? So when you have to market yourself to, for example, international conferences, it may not be that easy for every single studio to be able to go to an international conference. However, if you have a cluster initiative and you are a member of that cluster initiative can help to sort of represent you, if you will, at these kinds of conferences. So it's really just a matter of collaborating and trying to get economies of scale in terms of the costs of setting up and marketing and establishing standards and that sort of thing.
So in the next 7 to 10 years or so, for the Jamaican animation industry sector, would we have a competitive advantage as a productive sector as opposed to just a service and outsourcing sort of sector? Do you think?
The short answer to the question is yes, because of the faith and confidence that I have in our innate creativity. But that's why I said essentially that just being a service provider is not really a sustainable model. So look, every country is going to have to, at the end of the day, develop their own individual strategies, right? And certainly one of the things that we have to look at in Jamaica as we go for the jobs, because that's the sort of short-term need and desire, but we also have to be able to develop a more sustainable model, and that involves teaching people about intellectual property, teaching people, and that's why I said this culture of innovation. Don't just copy what everybody else does. There's a lot of, we have quite a few manga artists here, for example, and that's great. That's great because that's a very popular art form. But we need to be thinking about our own animation art form. We need to be innovating. We need to be doing our own thing. And as we do so, just like we did with reggae music, if we come up with a sort of indigenous, instantly recognized Jamaican style, that will certainly inure to our benefit in the future. So, but that's something that we have to do again as an industry. For example, these are the kinds of discussions and the kind of development activities that we have to undertake.
Are you an artist?
Can I ask one more?
Are you an
question
artist?
to me?
Yes.
I'm a freelance learner.
A freelance.
I mean, I teach myself.
You're an animator.
I dabble in things. I wanted to be a game designer circa about 10 years ago, but of course parents, Jamaica, it's foolishness, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward 10 years later, we're having a conference about animation and gaming. So.
That's such a common story. That's such a common story. You wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that story.
Now I'm
It's
in
unfortunate.
marketing. Go figure.
Okay, well,
Can I have one quick question?
you may yet have your
Mr. Green?
opportunity to pursue your passion. So, ask a
Okay.
question.
About the indie developing industry, I know that it's kind of saturating what gaming is all about, now causing more consoles to digitize their efforts and such. Like Square has their Crystal Studio and Lumix engines that they create games on. I think NAMCO's a licensing and publishing agency, I'm not completely sure, but have you guys ever thought of dabbling in game engines for the prosumer, kind of like what DSLRs are for like the indie film developer?
She's gone very technical now. Okay.
Is that,
Can you get...
is that too far? Or?
That's you, David.
No, David, that's definitely...
David, you have to decode. Decode for us, David. Or is that you, Kevin?
Is that too far?
You want to take a stab in NAMCO? Or?
Well, it's actually a very easy question. The answer is no. We haven't done that, but it's a great question because...
Speaking to the mic.
The answer is no. We haven't done that because we value that intellectual property and we don't necessarily want to share it with other companies. However, it's a great way to make revenue if you can, in fact, license those rights. But that's your underlying code, and you want to keep that pretty close to your chest in many situations. So that's my response to that.
All right. Well, we wish you all the very best in pursuing your passion. Please identify yourself. I have 2 minutes and
all right, my name is Terry Ranglin, and as someone who is heavily involved in conflict resolution, I'm a mediator with the Dispute Resolution Foundation. I noted this is exciting stuff, and I reflected on the energy and the vibe from the session yesterday on policy, on those handling the policy agenda, and I thought, we as a people really need to, as part of my work, to refocus our perspective on conflict. Those passions that were reflected in that session yesterday of contentiousness, that if we understand that's typical of human beings. It's the passion, all of the passion, which for me seem to are being mishandled then. For those handling the policy agenda, that we certainly need to refocus, to change our perspective, that conflict can in fact be positive and can spur us into the kind of action that I see happening with the people in the animation arena. And that the lesson for those who are trying to handle the policy is that those others have seized the action and have found the goal, G-O-L-D. And that the lesson for the rest of us is that we need to refocus, to find that gold within all the contentiousness. And that others have jumped into action, and the policy people, they're waiting on you to seize the gold and move beyond the conflict and the contentious.
Thank you,
All right.
Terry. Certainly a tale of two sessions. Thank you for so eloquently putting that. My sister from the Rastafarian faith.
Greetings. Sidan Ishigado. Yes, I don't have a question. I'm just making a statement because I saw the animation with the Snoop lion and I saw the Rasta mouse being perpetrated. And I know that there's a plethora of others such as what we see here today. But I'm wanting to remind you that this WIPO has their protocols in place to protect intellectual property and indigenous people's culture. And I want to remind that some of these things, whereas they might be humorous to the general public, they really amount to cultural misappropriation. And I would like to know what comments you have in that respect, how to protect the people that are going to be suffering from this sort of violation.
Thank you for your question. Who wants to take that one on? Mr. Ganchev, if you want to make a comment, I would invite you as WIPO. But go
Right.
ahead.
Very, very timely intervention, for sure. You'll notice that, on the last slide I had, I spoke about a continuing process of education. And I also spoke about a continuing process of innovation. It is unfortunate, but sometimes there isn't the degree of sensitivity that is required. And it's not because people are bad people. It probably has a lot to do with just a lack of engagement. It is said, I'm not part of the Rasta Mouse development team, so I don't really know. But it was stated that there was consultation with persons of Rastafari faith. I don't know how deep those consultations went. I don't know who the consultations were made with, but it was something that allegedly happened. And coming out of that, you have what is now Rasta Mouse. So I think what is important, and this is something that goes not just beyond, or something that goes beyond Rastafari, is exactly what you have said, that there does need to be a degree of sensitivity when we create our intellectual property, and there needs to be constant engagement on all sides, right? That's the only way to get around this, because oftentimes people engage in things without really knowing what those sensitivities are and where those pressure points are with respect to cultural respect, right? So it's really about continuing that engagement. So when you see something that is offensive, engage, right? And let the persons know and do it in a way that is, respectful and congenial and, mutually beneficial to all, because I don't know that it's necessarily the intent of persons, creative persons who create content, to be offensive to anyone.
There's the issue of respect, but also compensation, and I wonder if there's also a perspective on that. You could use a mic here if you wish. Let me hear from. I think a WIPO perspective here might be very instructive.
Thanks for bringing me in this debate. I'm not sure I can give a full answer to this question, but I'll first of all use the opportunity to thank the panelists for a super interesting discussion. And picking up from the first phrase with which David started, indeed the publication, the WIPO publication, Mastering the Game, on which he and my colleague Donna have been working for a long time, is going to come out within a month. And it will be available for free for download from our website. So I'm sure that if you go and visit JIPO's website, they will put a link to that publication, so you're free to download it, and it's a very heavy material to read, but there's a lot of good stuff there, so it kind of follows up on all the issues that were taken up in this discussion. Now, on the issue of the misappropriation of traditional knowledge and cultural heritage related issues, as you know, there is an intergovernmental process going on for the last, Lily Claire, what is it, 14 years? It's very difficult to forge an international consensus and to build up international law in terms of the protection of traditional knowledge, cultural expressions. So the discussions have really come to a draft international instrument. A lot of progress has been made, but we are not yet there on the international level, which of course does not prevent you as a country to come up with your own solutions that would be most appropriate for the national context, and that could be applied nationally. But in terms of international protection, unfortunately, I cannot tell you when this process will finish. It's very difficult. There are very diverse interests. There are different national practices, and this is a typical process when an international harmonization is not based on so many examples, so you're trying to build something and then implement it on the national level. Whereas in many other fields, you're picking up the best national examples and then trying to construct an international norm. So it's a difficult process. I hope that it is going to bring soon the results that we all want to, but in the meantime, don't wait.
Thank you very much. All right, we have to
if
wrap
I
up.
may make just a final comment, if
All
I
right.
may.
You're standing right before these people and lunch, so.
Yes. I think this is quite a good reflective tone on which to end the session. Because if we expand it even a little further, we must recognize that as we think of brand Jamaica, brand Trinidad, and so forth, how are we using stereotypes? We who are in the creative industries and we are creating a product, are we reinforcing the positive element of our culture or the negative element? We know out there, if we say drugs, you think of a certain country. If you say ganja, you think of another country. Now, should our creative work reinforce the negative stereotypes? Clearly it ought not to, and I think each of us ought to be standard bearers. And as you said, engage those persons, and as a marketer, I'm going to say, vote with your feet. Do not buy that product. Communicate. Now everybody has a website, Twitter, what have you. Use this to communicate to the producers that such products are in fact offensive. But I think it's an excellent point for us to end the session. As we go forward, creating our own intellectual property, we must also be guided by our morals and really what do we think brand Jamaica, brand Trinidad, brand Barbados should represent.
Thank you. Excellent. Food for thought. With that, we break for lunch. Thank you for being a part of this session.